what the saving was, what the benefit was. But actually, it's very much that is an incredible benefit to the companies. I mean, imagine a scenario where you avoid a fine because you've got the data. So there's a hell of a lot of benefit there that most people don't see.
Yeah.
Haven't got the insight to do it.
But I mean, I guess trying to be a little bit more provocative here, I mean, would you say, Oliver, that because you're seeing a lot of poorly installed or unused instrumentation out there, that us to be talking about predictive asset management, it's kind of hype because the industry isn't there yet? Or do you think that, you know, at least they have a clear idea of where they need to get to, but there's still a lot of heavy lifting?
I'm going to use the example of yesterday. Global Omnium, digital twin. Why does it work? Because they've invested the time, the skills, the money to get the data right. Done a brilliant job doing it. If you haven't got a good instrumentation asset base, forget it. Don't bother. Global Omnium showed us how to do it. At the end of the day, yes, if you've got, I mean, it showed when I was in a water company, managing the flow measurement asset base, I could tell you where the sewer was blocked from the wastewater treatment works. Very simple. Yeah. You looked at the data. I think what I've been saying to a lot of people is work out what information you want, and then base your KPIs, base your everything else, and then do that trickle-down approach.
Just around that. How are we doing on the technology, guys? Struggling. I'd like to invite a special guest. Now, this is a surprise to everybody, himself included. Pedro, come and join us up on the stage, if you will. Pilar, are you willing to join us, maybe? And no? It's okay? Good. Pedro, you are from Aguas de Porto, the utility. Sit in the middle, please, sir. You're in the limelight right now, and I know this is completely spontaneous, but I also know that in your role as CTO at the utility there, you've done a lot in connecting your assets together by using data, and you've used that to drive as well asset management, I assume?
Well, good afternoon for all. That's a surprise, but it's amazing to talk to you to discuss a little bit about asset management. Yes, I was listening to Oliver right now, and we're talking about the spectacular work that Global did, and the fact that data is for nothing if people don't know which information they want to. So before that, for our experience, what we used to say is, first of all, business units need to know what they really want. And to do that, you just have to connect all the sensors and all the data that is connected daily by the operators in the field and by the GIS and by all the people that are working and all the sensors that we have in our assets to gather it and to build information. But absolutely clear, yes, we did a great job managing data and building information, and after that, knowledge. And in the end of the day, if you know what you want, the ROI is very positive and very quick and very evident, or self-evident for everyone in the company.
And you were describing to me yesterday that the way you've approached it is a very pragmatic solution. You've not looked for, let's say, a 22nd century solution, something for the future, but you've actually used things which are quite regular technologies to put things together in a very short amount of time. Could you describe what you did there?
Yes, the thing is, when you have legacy and systems, and you have very different systems and proprietary systems, it's very difficult to just put them together and to build information that could be useful for management. And before that, to see how the assets are, and with that, take some decisions that have to be made very clear for the one who wants to make interventions in the field. So when you have such legacy systems, what you do, in our opinion, is to just keep them working because they are still useful for the business, but in order to extract information from them and data for them, the thing has to be very simple. And what we did was just to, if you have solutions that are proprietary and that completely closed in a era of open information, open data, open innovation, very quick and agile, you have to be very simple. So what we created was a middleware of data that integrates every sensor that measures things in the company, no matter what they are. And then after that, what we did was to, after putting everything, the data correctly according to the rules of the company, was extract information from it and give it to the operators, to middle management and top management in order to everyone has access to the same information at the same time. So, but keep it simple.
Keep it simple.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll come back to that message in just a moment, because I know that technology is no longer defeating us. And Mark, can you hear us loud and clear?
I can hear you.
Excellent. So you may have missed Keith's introduction, but he was talking about some of the trends in asset management, some of the investments, some of the projects going on. 15% of the digital water investments in projects, according to his research, have been done in the area of asset management. So Black & Veatch must be really, really busy.
Well, it's interesting because what we see is a lot of small projects taking place to test assumptions or to pilot approaches. It doesn't surprise me that it's in asset management, because if you think asset management, the whole purpose is creating value from assets and making forward-based, risk-based decisions. So it's understandable that whether you're looking to improve operations within a facility, looking to be smarter with how you build investment plans, looking at how you better understand the performance of your assets, that this is the area you might focus on. I guess what's interesting to me is and I think I just caught the last bit of the conversation there, was this issue that it's not as easy as kind of implementing it in a green field. If we were using all new technology, all new assets, you could just hook it all up and away you go. But we all know that there's a vast difference in ages, in conditions, and in capabilities of the assets that we have. So I think the successful implementation of digital solutions is a challenge due to that very issue.
And how do we overcome that challenge? This is, Pedro Vieira from Aguas do Porto, from the Porto utility, describing a project they've done to basically link everything up in a very pragmatic solution. He jumped in whilst you guys were asleep. But back to you, Mark, very quickly. How do you actually do that in maybe not only in a European context? Do you have some examples from elsewhere?
I think a phrase that you said, keep it simple. Look for the things that are easy to connect. Look for the opportunities where 1 + 1 can equal 3. So we've all seen that in isolation, data is useful. Connected and used together and potentially transformed, it can be incredibly powerful. So I think it's about extracting value. It's understanding that speed to value, whether it be a simple solution or a complex solution, really having a clear view of, I want to test this assumption, I want to test it live to gain confidence in it, I then want to deploy it to return value. And whether that value is measured as an increase in performance or a reduction in cost or a reduction in risk, I think it's just that, keep it simple. Find solutions that solve problems. Sometimes what I see is solutions that are becoming available and affordable, and people looking for problems to test them on, rather than deploying the solutions on problems they already know they have. So that doesn't just account for here in the UK or in Europe. If you look at the States or in Asia, it's the same thing. We are dealing at a strategic level with water scarcity, with the rapid deployment of technology coming into the sector, with day zero issues around water and extreme flooding at the opposite end. So I think the key for me is really find the problem that you're looking to solve and pick a point that is value for money. And that gives you a basis to grow, because one of the other main things I see is how companies deploy innovation or technology. Everyone is trying a slightly different way at it because I don't think anyone's really cracked it. And I think actually solving some problems, you can actually learn on the job how it feels right for your particular company to harness these capabilities and solutions and deploy them effectively.
Pedro, let me come back to you very quickly. Some of the values which you've generated in your project, do you have some quantifiable statistics? We heard from Global Aluminium this morning that one I remember was a 15% in reduction in energy consumption through introducing the digital solutions which you had, the digital twin. 15% in energy consumption sounds pretty big. Do you have similar statistics, and do you have quantifiable values?
Thank you. Yes, of course. After the implementation of the project, what we did was to try to follow very closely some KPIs that we have in our balance scorecard. And the first thing is when you have automated KPIs that give you online everything that is going on in the field, the operations really go better, even though just because it is quicker to decide. So, and after that, pipe bursting also, pipe burst repairs also went better, and water loss was being reduced faster. And by the other end, we have ROI of investment of our own project in, I think, 20 months. That was very, very good. And after that, in the 5 years contract that we have with the consortium that is applying that, well, the project is paid already. So for the point of view of KPIs and addressing the needs of operational needs and financial needs, it is absolutely, it was a very good choice to, by one end, putting rules in the data, and by the other end, put everyone seeing online decision at the same time.
Those are very convincing economic arguments. Let me come to Pernille now. Pernille, are you with us online? I hope so. Pernille Ingildsen from Kalundborg, Forsyning. I'm hoping to have pronounced that more or less correctly. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. It's difficult to hear the ones in the panel, but I can hear you.
Well, give us your interest or your insights, please, on the asset management. You were talking about soft city infrastructure, I believe, but give us some insights as to your view.
Yeah, I think what we're experiencing in Kalundborg utility is that somehow, if you talk very narrowly about asset management, you're maybe missing some of the bigger picture. Of course, we need to maintain our assets, but in the same at the same time, we are going to change it. What I would like to share with you a bit about it is we are talking a lot in Kalundborg utility about the old story and the new story, and what is going to happen in the future. So we are looking a lot into the world as a VUCA world, V for volatile, U for uncertain, and C from complex, and A for ambiguous. So we have all this change happening. So what we have found of two key points is that we need to make our new systems extremely flexible, because our mindset and our understanding of the problem we are trying to solve is actually changing very fast. So that's sort of one thing. We really need to keep things flexible when we design new solutions. And the other one is a lot about smart water utilities technology, or big data, or Industry 4.0. It really has come to a kind of a tipping point, or is nearing a tipping point, where we can really create transparency in what we're doing, which is another way to operate our plant in a more holistic way. So we are sort of trying to look into the future and see what does it actually mean. And I think one of the difficulties with looking at this kind of standard asset management thinking is that you think that the future is...
We'll come back to Pernille.
Sorry?
Guys, just leave it. All right, we lost you for just 1 second there. But you're talking about the
sorry.
flexibility, and remind us where Kalundborg exactly is.
Kalundborg is in Denmark, so if you know where Copenhagen is, it's just on the opposite end of Zealand, the island it is on. Kalundborg is very famous for the world's largest industrial symbiosis, where all the industries are exchanging waste, and so that the waste from one company becomes resources in another company. So it's an interesting place to work with a lot of stakeholders and a lot of holistic thinking, and that's what we're trying to put into our asset management thinking as well.
The perfect breeding ground for good ideas, no doubt. Andrew, last but not least, Andrew Donnelly from EPAL. Hello there. Please introduce some of your asset management ideas.
Oof. Even though I'm in the asset, good afternoon everybody, sorry. I've just joined the debate now. There was some technical issue there, so I'm just catching up here. My specific role in the company is to do with non-revenue water. So this is to do with network monitoring, network modeling, as well as maintaining all the infrastructure for those systems. We're talking about setting up DMAs, the meters and the telemetry that goes with that. And I guess what I'd say we have within this context is we have a classic solution, classic sort of passive telemetry system, active leakage control teams who then interpret that data and then go out and look and find the leakage. But my department is included in the asset management division within the company. So not only am I trying to manage an operational teams which have to intervene within the network on a daily basis, everything that we do has to be documented and passed up the food chain, if you like, to my colleagues in the planning department here on site, where we're looking into longer term investments as to whether we do repairs or whether we go down the line of renovation and substitution. So I think what I liked was, as I say, I picked up the conversation quite late there, but I liked what Mark was saying about finding solutions to solve problems. And I think part of the success that we've had is we've gone back to a common sense solution, if you like, and we haven't lost focus of what we're trying to achieve. It does create a bit of difficulty at times trying to convince other colleagues that we shouldn't be going to super smart systems straight away. You have to walk before you can run and actually deliver solutions to real problems. And I think the right solutions for whatever how you get there. I think Mark's comment was on the nail with that. Yeah.
Forgive me for asking, but documenting everything and pushing things up through the hierarchy, that sounds like quite a laborious process. Does it take a lot more time, and is it more difficult to exchange things? And we heard from Pernille, and I'll bring her in a second, that they have a physical campus where they can exchange between many different industries.
I was meaning more sort of management of the daily events, say where we're talking about a burst on the network. We make sure that's correctly documented in the GIS system, and then it's then available in some format or other that our colleagues who perhaps not looking at the data on a daily basis, but a monthly basis or an annual basis in terms of where we're going in terms of network analysis and planning from that point of view. So it's sort of a commonality in the data. And to be honest, yeah, we've gone through the process of creating lots of data, lots of information which wasn't useful, but during those times you filter through what you have to make sure that what you're left with is essential for and applicable for various tariffs within the company. So it doesn't become an onerous task once you've filtered all the stuff through that you don't want and you've got what you do need in a correct order. It sounds simple, but it's not.
It does. But it's feeding data into the system, obviously. But what are your main drivers? You talked about reducing non-revenue water. Is that the main driver for your asset management program?
I would say it was. There's a particular story within the company that I have to go back to about 2005, 2006, and that there was a new board came in, and their view was that there was a lack of integration of data within the company. And they used the non-revenue water, combating water losses, as a catalyzer to change that philosophy of data integration or lack of data integration within the company. Anybody who knows much about water losses knows that it goes into every area of the company. You need inputs from operations, from maintenance, from asset management, from lab, from commercial. And all these other divisions of the company can benefit from non-revenue water solutions as well. And what we need is integration of data. I mentioned the GIS, you've also got the customer relationship management. We've got other systems for infrastructure inspection. And what it was like non-revenue water became a glue to pull together all these different activities within the company. So the phrase that I keep using is a catalyzer for change. But the main objective is to have more integration of data within the company. And I think a decade on from that, we're more or less there, but we can't rest where we are. We have to continue getting better as to what we're doing on that. So I think non-revenue water was used as a tool to get where we wanted in terms of adequate data. Yeah.
Keith, does that sound familiar? Are those drivers which are typical in the water sector? And how does it maybe compare, if you have any insight, to other industries and their asset management programs?
Yeah, well, I think I wanted to ask Andrew if he can hear me. Yeah? Great. Non-revenue water, was there a clear quantification of money saved, or was it really you were pursuing operational efficiencies? I mean, there was no regulatory requirement that said you had to reduce it by X%, no? Or there was?
Yeah, I understand the question. There was, when I started the project, we had a non-revenue water of about 20, let me just look at my presentation, which I have handily ready. 23.5%. In terms of financial value, we're in a strange situation because our marginal cost of water is very, very low. It's a couple of cents. So there wasn't the financial part from there. But it goes into other things. There's 2004, 2005, Iberia had a very severe drought. So the water scarcity, lack of water resources became a major factor. So the cost starts to become less relevant. And when you're losing a quarter of your production, then you, with a tendency of still going up, you can't continue to build infrastructure to supply that demand. Yeah. So it's not just about the marginal cost of water. What I had to started to talk about was the operational cost of water, which was an order of magnitude higher than the marginal cost of water. So it became financially beneficial. Yeah. The example that I've got when I do the general presentation on this is the volume of water that we recovered in just 2 zones of the city was sufficient to pay for the whole project implementation in the whole of the city within 2 years.
Yeah, no, that speaks for itself. No, that makes sense. I think we have seen, I mean, a lot of utilities, I think, struggle to get resources because they calculate what is their sustainable economic level of leakage, and they decide, just as you said, the marginal cost is minimal, it's not worth it. But if you look at leakage reduction as part of this longer term journey to organize your data, to manage your assets better, to have better awareness of what's going on in the network, then obviously the benefits are much bigger than that.
I completely agree. How do you put a cost on these intangible benefits? What's the cost value of solving a pressure problem for a particular street in the city and giving a better service to the clients? I can't put a cost on that, but it's of intrinsic value to the company to do that. And especially in terms of reducing water losses, when we had a bad drought in 2004, 2005. We also had a severe drought here up until autumn time last year. In some areas of Portugal, we were down to 2 or 3 weeks of supply. Economics doesn't come in. Well, economics has a big factor in that because we had to start trucking water in from a different supply area. So when we simply don't have the resource, it's going to last a matter of weeks. We have to take action. So there is a driver from that point of view as well, not just economic.
Pernille, let me bring you in very briefly, and then we'll come to Oliver if we can. Pernille, can you hear us?
Yes.
If you could please comment on some of the main drivers and maybe some. Do you have hard factors in terms of economics which are driving your asset management program, or some of the softer factors, being more proactive, having the transparency? Is that also what was driving you?
Yeah, that's the key driver. In Denmark, the non-revenue water is limited to 10% by law, so everybody have to go beyond that. So that's also a driver if you look into that arena. We have had slightly rising levels the last few years, and I think we have 7% now, and that gives concern in our utility. So now it becomes an increasing factor on the water side. But mostly what is interesting is to find new solutions for the old water treatment plant is now too old. So finding out what is the new solution, the new kind of system that we should build. And there's a lot of concern about how are we going to have the asset management work out, and that could we sort of prepare our system to be kind of asset management ready. So that's one of the concerns there.
Oliver, you had a point.
The point was that economic level of leakage isn't in some areas really relevant anymore, because we've all heard the UK situation and the talks about the jaws of death. Then leakage reduction becomes, well, reduce your leakage, reduce the per capita consumption, or run out of water, or spend the next 20 years building lots and lots and lots of reservoirs. And that situation in the UK is that almost dire thing of, I remember seeing about 5 or 6 years ago the supply demand for London, and actually the jaws of death were a relief, because the Thames Water reckoned they were going to run out of water by 2030, which is only 10 years away. At least the jaws of death was 25 years from now, so that's an extra 15 years. So actually that was good news in a way, but when you've got that severe water shortage, almost a cubic metre or a megalitre saved through leakage reduction is something you don't have to invest in the future in a reservoir to protect the storage for people. So
Absolutely.
It's that asset management driver for leakage reduction.
Let me come back to Andrew and Pernille, and also to Pedro, and ask you, have you started from scratch in your ideas for this, or have you had some sources of information, maybe some other utilities to compare your programs with? Did EPAL speak to Aguas de Porto a little bit about this, and how can you share some of the Danish experiences? What kind of information exchange do you have amongst utilities when it comes to these asset management programs?
Would you like me to reply
first
on that? It's funny enough, I was just writing almost like a small article this morning, which was reviewing our history of our project within the company this morning, and so it's a good timely question. The company started back in 2005 with one person, and that was me. I was lucky at the time because I had the direct support of the management board. I worked directly for the company president, and we didn't have any restrictions as terms of who we could contract. So the decision by the company was to hire 4 graduate engineers who just finished university to come and work in the company as a blank sheet of paper to train up as specialists in non-revenue water. And I think if there's a secret of our success in the company over the last 15 years, is the fact that those 4 people are still working in the company and still doing the same role as they were 15 years ago. We've been able to invest in the people. Then you talk about smart systems and what have you. The smartest element in the system is still the people, is still the human resources. And our secret of sustainability is the fact that these 4 people have been involved in the planning of our monitoring and DMA system and telemetry system, the implementation of it, and then the maintenance of it and interpreting all the data. So they know intimately not only our own monitoring system, but our network. We can problem solve in our own network, both on a daily basis, say pressure problems, water quality problems, or longer term, where you're talking into network renovations, where the network needs to be redesigned to respond to changing demand patterns or whatever. We've kept that knowledge within the company. I did work for a consultancy side, so I'm not talking against consultants, but what we've got is we've got an internal team of consultants who are available to any other area of the company to help and assist them in terms of those diagnostics. So I think our part of the secret is investing in our own people as well as our own systems. Yeah.
Pedro, where is your inspiration from and how do you exchange with colleagues?
Yeah, that project that I've told you was created within the company because we searched for some solutions in the market, and effectively, as Andrew is saying, we didn't found a solution that could fit our needs. So what we did was gather an internal team that understood and knew all the assets that were in the company, and also they knew what they wanted to do. That's very important. So with all this knowledge, we made an RFP, sorry, and made an international tender, and that's what it is. So it comes from the external companies that come from outside. They will just follow the instructions that the internal teams define. So I completely agree that it's very important to retain talent and people within the company that make sustainable a roadmap of management that is defined very quickly and very sharply. But in the meanwhile, you have to gather all the external knowledge and also the open data that is made by external stakeholders, and it can help you make better decisions, and in the end of the day, make smart things happen fast.
Pernille, the same question to you. Where was your source of inspiration? Did you learn from colleagues? And also, can I add, you talked about being on one campus with many different industries. Have you looked into the asset management programs of, I don't know, food and beverage or whatever you might have in your vicinity?
Yeah, we were inspired from a lot of different places. And when we started 6 years ago with the asset management, it was actually quite new, the way of thinking for Denmark. So we had inspiration from various Danish consulting companies, but even they didn't know exactly how to implement it. So we actually went through a number of different consulting companies before we found a solution that we found were fitting. Another thing we did was actually to go to the UK, where they were very much ahead of us in terms of management. So we visited Welsh Water, which was a great inspiration in many ways. But what is interesting is that one of the reasons that we were very interested and very inspired by the UK was the special kind of regulation that we have in the UK. The Danish government became very inspired by and tried to implement in Denmark. And it has worked and it hasn't worked. It at least has sparked a lot of controversy because it has sort of pushed in a thinking that was very asset or very cost-benefit like, which was different from the mindset we had in the utilities earlier. So actually it made a lot of conflicts in the utilities and between utilities and the regulatory body. And now we have had this system for a while, and I'm sensing things are changing a bit again, back to the thing about trying to establish a sustainable future. Then perhaps this narrow optimization of the assets is not really center point of the discussion anymore. And this year there's been so much rain that part of Denmark has been completely underwater. So that sort of also changes the agenda a bit. So my sense, if I look to all of Denmark, asset management as a popularity thing is diminishing a bit, and the agenda is changing into sustainability and trying to find new ways of making good water infrastructure.
Mark, let's bring you in there. Is that a trend you're also observing? And the second question is, very briefly, what does the future hold? What's the next 5 years, Mark Kaney?
It's interesting. More anecdotally, because I was actually involved in some of the work that Pernille talked about at my previous company, Sweco. So I was involved in some of those study trips to the UK and discussions with the Danish regulator about moving to a more service-linked regulatory model. I think what's interesting is there was that stage of evolution which was about defining the KPIs. What are the key drivers? Not just money, but benefit. If we're going to spend money, what benefit do you get from it? I think the agenda, so the KPIs that we're now focusing on are changing. So the asset management practice of making sure you measure the right things, making sure you track milestones against your aims and objectives, making sure your organization has line of sight from activities and projects through to strategies and goals is still the same thing. What has changed is what we see as those goals and what are those key primary indicators. It's no longer just the hard targets. As Oliver said, you know, there are a number of places that are facing sort of day zero issues and water scarcity. We're now seeing a focus on PCC targets driving down. And the traditional way of doing that is like, well, you know, we'll just manage it down through hard solutions. Now we see things ranging from education programs, smart metering to make sure people are making, you know, having responsible water use. The social agenda and the raising of the issues around water being a valuable commodity are causing those kind of drivers to be the ones that we now maybe focus upon. Some of the wider things that we're seeing in the UK, and in fact some of the utility companies in this latest regulatory period, submitted a business plan that revolved around a multi-capitals approach. So not just financial, but societal, intellectual, environmental, and they are saying that they will weigh up the cost and the benefits of the actions that they take across this multitude of drivers. So I think what this does is it changes maybe the focus of the actions within a company, but the methodologies that we use to track those KPIs and the good asset management practices of always making sure you understand the risk and value of decisions you take, I believe are still the same.
Did you have a point, Oliver?
Yeah, just one of the things that was missed out on that educational piece is we're going to see a bit later in serious gaming.
That's a very good plug for the 6:30 session here, yes. But before we get there, let's go back to Keith. You heard some of the changing dynamics in the market. Would you like to add to that and maybe give us an outlook of where things will be in 40 years?
40, wow, okay. Well, first I want to say, I mean, I think to Mark's point, that now is kind of when the rubber hits the road, when, you know, regulation has applied pressure and there are solutions out on the market, they are starting to be procured, so now really it's a question of executing on it. And that will take us probably through the next 5 to 10 years at a minimum. Where are we going to be 30 years after this? You know, I mean, I think there's an argument for a very different utility model. I think there's, you know, in theory, if we're talking about the UK, they're going to liberalize, they're going to open for competition, water supply to the home. And that could bring in, you know, companies that are maybe more sophisticated in customer management, that are bringing other digital tools, that users become really efficient with their own water consumption, and that brings in a whole other slew of potential solutions in terms of distributed water supply. And I think they're going forward, this sort of centralized way of managing water supply there may be more of a different role that the consumer plays, is what I'm alluding to. But right now, I think it's about getting the utilities that we have now in the best shape as possible to deal with all the threats that we're facing or regarding climate change and whatever else.
And Mark is taking copious notes of everything which you're saying right there and writing it all down. So that's going to be in the next Black and Beach report in 6 months about asset management. So well done for that. Good.
12
Ladies
months,
and
I'm
gents.
a bit busy.
Yep, sorry?
12 months, I'm a bit busy.
Listen, we realize it's been technically challenging, but we're coming to a conclusion right now. Thank you so much to Pernille, to Andrew, and to Mark for joining us virtually. And thank you here on the stage to Oliver, to Keith, and especially to Pedro, who came in spontaneously when we had a technical breakdown there. That's great flexibility. Thank you very much. Absolutely. A good big round of applause, please, for our panel. Thank you. And we have a bit of excess champagne to drink this evening whilst you're not here, unfortunately, guys. Okay, so that brings this session to a conclusion. But stay here because I believe we've got the Innovations Forum coming up, and there's lots of interesting pitches coming in, and I'm sure someone's going to come and take the microphone out of my hand to look after that. That's going to be starting in just 30 seconds, 1 minute.